Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of 1990s Represent. We're still in our third cycle of 1991. We're talking about a movie for this episode. In this episode, we're talking about The Rocketeer. Haven't seen this movie in a long time, and most recently we rewatched it on Disney Plus and had an insanely fun time watching it. It's just a good time of a movie, absolute blast. I have some notes here about it. We're going to go through those and then discuss the plot and all that kind of stuff as well. So let me grab my notes here. All right, here we go. Oh, there we are. So The Rocketeer, first released June 21st, 1991. I remember when before this was out, just being incredibly excited to see this movie. It was probably, if I had to think about the movies I saw in 1991, at least in theaters, this was probably the one I was the most excited to see. This and maybe Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I wasn't allowed to see Terminator 2 when it was in theaters because it was I was 11. We rented that when it came out. Also Point Break. Didn't really know anything about that movie during that time period. I think I saw it on HBO a little bit after that. But The Rocketeer was probably, for 1991, the movie I was the most excited to see. I remember I vividly remember this movie coming out, like I said, we said earlier, June 21st, 1991. I was on vacation, I think visiting my grandparents in New York at the time. And my grandmother took us to see this movie. And I remember having an absolute blast with it. It was just a ton of fun. I remember watching it again maybe once or twice more, when it was on VHS. But this most recent rewatch has been, I want to say, probably almost 30 years since I've seen it. And I don't know why I waited so long to rewatch it, because this most recent time seeing it just had an absolute blast. But based off the Dave Stevens graphic novel from, I think, 1982. And the cool thing with this is, during my research for this, it was apparently kind of done as a pulp style comic book, as a throwback to kind of the matinees and serials of the 1950s, or maybe even earlier. So immediately reading that, it reminded me of also how George Lucas and Steven Spielberg basically did the same thing for their Indiana Jones character as well. How they made something new, kind of basing it off of something from, from their childhood. Dave Stevens did the same thing with The Rocketeer, made a kind of a modernized, or a modern, obviously being from 1982, recreation of something that you would see in pulp magazines and pulp comics of the 1950s, maybe 1940s. So, and the visual style is very much like that as well in the film. I haven't read any of the comics or the graphic novels, which I actually might want to check out, because if they're anything like this, the movie, I think it would just be a good time. But I remember also reading this in an issue of Disney Adventures magazine. I think there's a whole archive of them available online now. I think archive.org has a good amount of those, and I actually downloaded the issue that I remember reading. It was $1.95 back in 1991, and I still have that issue somewhere. It's probably just buried in a box. But they had a whole bunch of information about the movie, other Disney stuff as well. But the issue that I had was basically Rocketeer was the cover story. So I remember reading that magazine front to back multiple times back in 1991, before this movie even came out. Film was directed by Joe Johnston, who previously done a lot of I think special effects work and behind the scenes work for a lot of other Lucasfilm projects like Star Wars and so on. I remember reading, I think it was one of the screenplays, because I have these art books. They're on this shelf back there. You can't see them from here, but they're I think only two of them have screenplays. I think it's New Hope and Return of the Jedi give you the screenplays and concept art. I think Empire Strikes Back doesn't give you the scripting necessarily. But there's a scene where Joe Johnston is doing some of I think he was doing some of the AT-AT stuff in The Empire Strikes Back. So basically, special effects artist, eventually directed films. I remember, and he also directed Captain America: The First Avenger in 2011. So 20 years later, And I remember seeing that movie and the scene where it kind of clicked with me about why it looked familiar, because there's a scene in the first Avenger where they're at like the world, it's not the World Fair, but they see like the floating car, the Stark floating car, and just kind of all the stuff going on at that like kind of like trade show, that like Art Deco style, like future, like retro futurism, if you want to call it that. And it definitely reminded me of the Rocketeer. And then when I like remember getting home later that day, like looking it up on IMDb, being like, oh, they're both directed by Joe Johnston, so that totally makes sense. The development on this movie started all the way back in 1983, when I guess the rights were kind of picked up to do the film after from the comic, which came out like I think the year like 1982. However, it sat in development hell for a long time. There's a lot of kind of like arguing over like the costume design and things like that. I think like Michael Eisner wanted a more traditional style like NASA helmet, and I think Joe Johnston and I think the writer were like more intent on using the helmet the way it was designed in the comic. So there was a whole bunch of just issues with that between like when it got actually like picked up and by the time it was actually made, which was like looks like it took like 7 years to eventually like start production on it, because it started filming in 1990. Came out to positive reviews, so pretty good reviews. Actually, let me just pull those review scores up really quick. See if there are any review scores on here. There might not be any, like I'm not seeing any actual review scores, but it did well critically. I think critics seem to like it, but it unfortunately did not do well commercially or financially, at least in the theaters, at least in the box office. So had roughly a budget between 35 and 40 billion dollars, and it only ended up grossing like 46 billion dollars, with the multiplier being like what we said in past is a film, if it can generate basically 2.5 times its production budget or its budget, it will tell you if the film is profitable or not, because like basically it has to gross 2.5 times the budget to be considered to be a success, because that kind of factors in like marketing and all that kind of stuff. So it probably didn't hit that, only hit like 46 million, so it didn't make a lot of money. I guess overall, don't know what the marketing budget was, but like if that 35 to 40 million dollars factors in marketing, it only made $6 million, which is still profitable, but it wasn't profitable enough to. I think they had plans for other Rocketeer stuff that they just ended up kind of scrapping. I guess there was a Disney Junior show that came out in 2019 about the Rocketeer, but I think I looked it up. It was more like a kids show, and I think it was more modernized. Like it was like from like the images, it looked more contemporary than being set in the late 30s. So the cast on this film is great. I'm actually going to just bring up the entire cast because they all do an amazing job in this movie. They all kind of, I think, got the assignment, so to speak. So you have Billy Campbell as Clifford Secord, who's the Rocketeer. That's kind of the main character in the film. You have Alan Arkin as Peavy, who is kind of the Rocketeer's like engineer, so to speak, and they run the kind of airfield together. You have Jennifer Connelly as Jenny Blake. And Paul Sorvino's in this. Completely forgot that he's in it. He plays like a mobster. Terry O'Quinn plays Howard Hughes. Timothy Dalton as Neville Sinclair. Ed Lauder as the FBI agent Finch. James Handy as another FBI agent. You have, I'm just not going to read, you have like Margot Martindale, who I remember seeing recently in Cocaine Bear. She's pretty good in this. You have Clint Howard. Anything else big? Not particularly. But basically, you have just this incredibly good cast that all seem to kind of understand the kind of pulpy kind of story they were trying to tell. Like, very basic, very much a popcorn film. Something that's, I think, like easily digestible, if you will. It's like less than 2 hours, like an hour and 48 minutes. But speaking of the cast, probably the best casting in this movie, in my opinion, I think kind of steals every scene he's in, is Timothy Dalton as Neville Sinclair. He basically is the villain for this film. He's an act. It's funny because it's an actor playing an actor. So again, it fits that, just a small amount fits that really interesting subgenre that I love, where it's movies about making movies. So they're basically filming in this movie essentially a Robin Hood-esque style story. There's like some swashbuckling going on in like a castle. Neville Sinclair is playing this, I think it's called like the Masked Bandit or something like that, or something along those lines. Basically, it's supposed to be Robin Hood. It's essentially him playing, it's essentially Timothy Dalton playing Errol Flynn, essentially. He does a great job as like this very charming, charismatic kind of like actor, but then also he's like secretly like working with, he's like secretly working with the Nazis to get the rocket pack. Perfect casting, I think. One of my favorite Timothy Dalton performances. He's just really, really good in this movie. Like he's got like the mustache. There's like even a scene where he's walking through this restaurant, or it's like this nightclub with Jennifer Connelly, and you see this person walk up to him and just say, "Oh, hello, hello, Neville," and like you see Neville turn to him, he's like, "Oh, hello, Clark," and it's Clark Gable. Like I remember like in 1991 not really knowing who Clark Gable was. I probably the first Clark Gable movie I think I saw was Gone with the Wind, and that would have been like 6 years after seeing this because I watched that as part of like a film class in high school. But I kind of knew who Errol Flynn was slightly because like this year, 1991, the Kevin Costner Robin Hood came out, and there's a lot of it was drawing a lot of comparisons to like the Errol Flynn Robin Hood. So I kind of had a vague kind of like familiarity with who Errol Flynn was at least. But perfect casting. People that were considered for the role of Cliff were they eventually all kind of fell through. But Kevin Costner, Matthew Modine, looks like Dennis Quaid, Kurt Russell, Bill Paxton, Emilio Estevez, Johnny Depp, who apparently was Disney's kind of first choice or favorite for the role. Basically, Disney was not on board with having Billy Campbell be this character. Joe Johnson and let's see here, Dave Stevens thought Billy Campbell was perfect for the role, and I tend to agree with him. He's actually like I don't really know much of his filmography like outside of this, but he is like also perfectly cast as kind of this reluctant hero, if you will, because he doesn't really know like the rocket. Like he basically gets it, and they're essentially just trying to like make enough money to pay off like for like their boss at like the airfield. But now, with that said, we're going to get into the plot of the film. So, plot of the film, basically, it's set in 1938, kind of like around Hollywood Hills, that kind of area. Cliff and Peavy work as, like, basically, they're like stunt, kind of like pilots and mechanic. They basically are, they do, like, air shows for this guy named Bigelow, who's kind of crooked, kind of corrupt a little bit. But they're out testing out a new plane that they've built for like the upcoming air show, and the flight goes well. They're flying it around. Is that where it exactly starts? I think so. I think kind of like that. But they're flying this plane around, and then it cuts to a police chase. And there's like a police car, an FBI car chasing after these criminals, and they're shooting at each other. And the plane flies over, and the criminal in the car in front shoots up at the plane and puts a bunch of holes in the plane, causes it to start leaking gas. Basically destroys the plane because it kind of has like a crash landing. But you see, the guy drives into the hangar. You see him like grab a suitcase and switch some stuff around, and eventually crashes. Like they blow up a fuel truck, and like kind of Cliff and Peavy are basically on the hook for paying the fuel costs. They're like, hey. And Bigelow's like, hey, you can go back to doing the clown gig. The clown gig makes money. And it's kind of thing that they're not wanting to do, but they might have to do it. But then basically, this one criminal basically gets arrested. And it cuts to Timothy Dalton kind of like swinging. He's like in his house, like practicing fencing. He's like swinging his sword around. And then Paul Sorvino's character comes in and he's like, hey, like, what's the deal? Why did you guys not get the rocket I told you to get? Like, he's like, hey, like, this is kind of, like, Timothy Dalton is kind of, like, laying it down. He's like, hey, get this thing back for me. He threatens Paul Sorvino, and he's like, I'll double your fee. And Paul Sorvino's like, no, you'll triple it if we find it. It turns out that the rocket that they're looking for actually got switched out at the, and it's under the seat of, like, another airplane at the PV and Cliff's kind of, like, airfield. But before that, Howard Hughes is showed. Howard Hughes kind of like some of this is based on real world stuff, but Howard Hughes kind of is like, hey, like this rocket pack is too dangerous. I should have never agreed to like help the government develop it. And you see him, he throws the blueprints into like a fireplace. And he's like, because he's like, if this stuff falls into the wrong hands, it can be like really bad. But then PV and Cliff discover it. They've discovered that it's a rocket pack. They like test it out. They tie it to a statue and like get it working. And then PV basically designs the entire flight suit. And one of the best lines of the movie is like Rocketeer's like fully decked out in his gear. He's like, how do I look? And he's like, PV's like a hood ornament. I just remember that being like one of the most iconic lines in that film. But also at the same time, Cliff is going out with Jennifer Connelly's character. Like takes her to a movie, and she's like, I got a scene in the Neville Sinclair movie tomorrow, and it cuts to them like they're working on the set. They do a couple takes, and basically, like I said earlier, this is kind of like the Robin Hood scene. Cliff sneaks onto the set and accidentally causes like a wall to collapse, kind of like ruins the take. And Timothy Dalton's character, Neville Sinclair, is like, I thought this was a closed set. The person that he's here to see, I want her fired. So basically, Jennifer Connelly's character gets fired, but like as soon as he overhears Neville Sinclair overhears their conversation about the rocket pack, so basically he rehires her because now she kind of knows where this rocket pack is, or maybe knows something about it. But they basically are now testing out this rocket pack. They go to like there's like the diner, like the Bulldog Diner kind of thing. I forget what it's called, but it's like a Bulldog Diner restaurant. They go there on their date. You know, this is actually like day before, but like it's revealed that basically like Cliff's like plane got destroyed, and like he wasn't being completely honest with Jennifer Connelly's character about that. And they basically have what they're going to plan on doing is using the rocket pack as part of their act. So the guy like Bigelow's like, hey, if Cliff isn't here in like 5 minutes, he's gonna get fired. And then like one of Cliff's friends takes up the plane in the clown suit, and this guy hasn't like flown a plane in years, and the plane starts having problems. So the Rocketeer has to like Rocketeer to the rescue. He rescues the guy, and Bigelow's whole thing is like, oh, like don't be alarmed, folks. It's all part of the show. It's all part of the show. And basically, Cliff saves the day, saves the plane, saves the pilot guy, maybe at least it saves the pilot. I remember the plane may have crashed. I think the plane did crash again because it crashed into the same gas truck that it did earlier. But basically, the FBI is also looking for this rocket pack, and they track down. They go to Bigelow's, and they find out that Bigelow has been murdered. I think Tiny Ron plays like the main henchman. He kills like the first guy that got caught, and then kills Bigelow. They're basically like looking for the rocket pack, and Timothy Dalton then decides to, obviously get more information out of Jennifer Connelly. He takes her to like this nice club, like, and then this is like reminded me of stuff in the first Avenger film, like the way like the set design and stuff like that. But they're at this club. Cliff basically is like, oh, we'll give back the rocket pack, but I need to like rescue her because she's hanging out with Neville Sinclair. Neville Sinclair is like dangerous or whatever. So basically, he sneaks into the restaurant or the club and puts a piece of like a note in her soup. Says like, meet me at the Big Fish in like 5 minutes. He pours the soup in there, and he's like kind of fumbling. And Timothy Dalton's like, hey, have you worked here before? Like, he's like, what's your problem? You idiot! You're spilling water on it and all this other stuff. So she goes and meets with Cliff, and they realize something is up. Neville Sinclair eventually pulls the note out of the soup and sees it. Cliff basically tells her what's going on, and then Neville Sinclair eventually catches back up. Neville catches back up to her, uses some chloroform on her to knock her out, and she's knocked out, and she wakes up at his house. She eventually like sees a secret passage, like a secret bookcase kind of thing, and she goes in there and eventually sees that Timothy Dalton's character, Neville Sinclair, is actually working for the Nazis. So this is like a huge like villain reveal. Or we know he's a villain, but at this point it's like they really cement the fact that he's a villain by it's 1938 and this guy's a Nazi. So they eventually want to do an exchange, and this is back at the restaurant. The restaurant's been taken over by the mob at this point, or the Bulldog restaurant. And they go in, and they're like, well, like it's like meet us at the Griffith Observatory at like 4 a.m. and we'll trade the rocket pack for Jenny. I think this is Jennifer Connelly's character's name. Anyhow, so Cliff goes back there with the rocket pack, and they're going to do a trade-off. And the guy's like, eventually it's revealed that Sinclair's a Nazi. Paul Sorvino's like, hey, he's like, hey, is this true? And then he's like, yeah, like he's like, what's it matter? This is kind of like a really, I really like this part of the movie because basically even like Paul Sorvino's character is like, he's like, hey, I've never earned an honest dollar in my life, but I'm an American and I'm not gonna like be working for a Nazi. It's funny because there's a bunch of Nazi troopers that like the mob and the basically the mafia and the FBI together for like are working together, at least temporarily. There's like this scene where these people, it's kind of like the whole thing with New York. Like I'm gonna use New Yorkers as an example. Like two New Yorkers might not like each other, but if somebody rolls up to them talking smack about New York, they're going to put their dislike for each other aside temporarily to deal with the guy who's talking smack about New York. Very similar kind of vibe here, where both the FBI agent and the mobster, Paul Sorvino's character, don't like the Nazis, so they put their differences aside temporarily to take out a bunch of Nazis. There's a scene where like they do this, like they shoot a bunch of Nazis and they look at each other, kind of like in like kind of like the head nod, kind of like I think it's like the Jeremiah Johnson meme where he's like that. So they do that. Basically, Neville gets onto the blimp, this huge zeppelin that's flying over. One thing I just forgot to mention is they go to Howard Hughes, and Howard Hughes shows him a film of like a newsreel essentially of what would happen if the Nazis got a hold of the rocket pack, and it showed a bunch of just Nazis flying over like from Europe to America, like just flying over completely, like Nazi flag raised and stuff like that. So basically, it's like bad times if the enemy gets a hold of this rocket pack. But anyway, they make an agreement to like let him use it one last time. They go up. There's a huge fight on the blimp. The Rocketeer gets onto the Zeppelin. He hasn't got a fight with like the main minion, but then eventually like Neville Sinclair's like, all right, give me the rocket pack or I'll like shoot Jennifer Connelly's character. There's a whole running gag with sticking gum on something. So Cliff sticks like a wad of gum on the back of the plane that PV takes off. At one point, the rocket is damaged, so the rocket pack has a hole in it, so it's leaking fuel. So they plug that hole by putting a piece of gum on top of it. When Neville Sinclair's like, all right, take off the pack, put it on the ground, and slide it across the ground. So the Rocketeer takes it off, puts it on the ground, and there's a quick scene where you see him slide the gum off the bullet hole, so it's leaking fuel. So Neville Sinclair then puts the rocket pack on, takes off, and after like getting away from the Zeppelin like temporarily, just ignites the rocket pack. He goes up in flames, lands on the Hollywood sign because the Hollywood sign originally used to say Hollywood Land. And they kind of screwed up the years here a little bit, because I did some research after seeing this movie about the Hollywood sign and went down a whole rabbit hole about that. But I think it was like not until like 1949 it was changed. It was like sometime in the 40s where the Hollywood Land sign used to say Hollywood Land, and eventually it now just says Hollywood. But that wasn't changed until like the late 40s, I think. But it's funny because they kind of throw that into the movie. Neville Sinclair, like ball of fire, lands on the Hollywood sign on the land part, destroying the land part, and just leaving the Hollywood sign intact. So I thought that was like a really cool, like nice little touch. They eventually escape the they have no rocket now, so now Jennifer Connelly or Jenny and Cliff have to get off of the blimp. They're all running with like the main henchman. At one point, the henchman is like actually tied into it with like a rope. So like eventually the rope like pulls him, and he basically is like he gets blown up with the thing. But Howard Hughes and PV fly by in like a little prop plane kind of thing. They drop a rope ladder, they grab it, they get rescued, and then eventually they go back. It cuts to there's the Cliff and Jenny are still together. They're at the back of the kind of Bulldog Cafe. The FBI and Howard Hughes show up to kind of like present PV and Cliff with like a new plane, since their original plane got destroyed earlier in the movie. And then Howard Hughes throws the Rocketeer a pack of chewing gum. And then that's kind of where the film ends. Just a very solid, good time of a movie. Like I said, I don't know why it took me so long to get back to rewatching this, but it definitely brought back a lot of like really good memories from like when I was like 11 and really excited to see this movie, and being able to go and see this in the theaters and just have an awesome time then. and had probably just as much fun rewatching it recently as well. Watched it on Disney Plus, but don't know if it's available anywhere else. But it's on Disney Plus if you want to watch it. Again, I just had an absolute blast, and it was like just kind of a very fun, like perfect, like summertime movie. I might go back and rewatch it again because I had just an incredible time on this most recent rewatch of it. But it ticks all the right boxes. It's got comedy, it's got like action, it's got like just kind of really cool like action set pieces with the planes and the rocket pack and all that kind of stuff. Just a very fun time. But that is going to do it for this episode. We'll be back again in a few days doing a video or computer game from 1991, and then we'll be moving back into 1992 and the rest of the decade after that. So thanks again for watching. Remember to take care, or sorry, thanks again for watching. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe. Take care and have a good one. See ya.